Method. Airwaves. Method. Dub Brown. Method. Airwaves. Dub Brown. You are now listening to Method Airwaves with Doug Brown.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Method Airwaves, my podcast. Today is the Star Wars edition, episode 2. I'm pretty excited to get my nerd on and to tell you everything about Star Wars and what it means to me. And episode 1, my first podcast, if you haven't checked it out, it is my life story. I talk about my skateboard career, how I got from A, B to C up until today. Check it out. I went pretty in depth. I was pretty thrilled about what people thought about it. The response has been great. Thank you everybody for listening. It does mean a lot to me. But let's get this started. Where to begin? Star Wars. Wow. Well, let me say this. There's 3 reasons why they invented movie theaters. Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. Dun 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 dun. That's right, folks. It's on. Let's let this begin. Star Wars, A New Hope. The very first film that they put out by, of course, George Lucas. I did see this in the theater. I believe it was, May 25th, 1977 is when this film was released. So I was 5 years old, I believe, just a little guy. And when I saw this movie, I remember a lot of it, being that young even. First and foremost, my father, he's always into seeing movies that are really big and kind of catch on, like Jurassic Park or whatever. And he wanted to see this film and told my brother, I have an older brother, he's 2 years older than me. He had told my brother and I that he wanted to take us to this film. Now, my father had some colleagues. He is a doctor, was a doctor. And one of his colleagues had said, look, you take these kids to Star Wars, but be warned, there's some scary stuff in it. That's the reputation he had about it. That it was this scary type film, which is kind of strange looking back, so innocent. So I go to this movie as a little guy, and wow, I sat there, and instantly I identified with Luke Skywalker. Why wouldn't I? He had the blonde hair, the blue eyes. I was this little boy version of Luke Skywalker. So I followed his journey, and I fell in love with the film, like everybody else. This movie was so big at the time because it was so different. Now, a lot of people think Star Wars is kind of a nerdy Star Trek science fiction film, which it isn't. And George Lucas will testify to this, that it's a space fantasy. It's based on deep roots of mythology. There's morals and values pumped into it. After seeing the film, I was inspired. My brother and I, we would get our flashlights out, and that would be our lightsabers. And my mom in nursing school had this big black cape. I remember wearing that, emulating Darth Vader with his voice. And I just fell in love with it. I would draw little pictures with my crayons, trying to draw stormtroopers and battles. And of course, the toys. That's a whole nother thing. George Lucas was big on gaining the rights to the marketing and started the whole toy line, which today it's a given that a movie comes out, you go to Walmart, toy aisle, bam. But back in the late 70s, it wasn't like that. So this was kind of something different, and wow. My parents, that first Christmas after Star Wars, they didn't want my brother and I fighting over toys. So what did they do? They would buy the same of both figures. So Christmas morning, we would receive, I remember this, 2 Death Squad Commander figures, both the same, two 12-inch large stormtrooper figures, dolls they called them, and that was something we got, and two TIE fighters. Yeah, both matching. So here we are. We had our toys, but they were the exact same. But we always had friends down the street that we would, trade our figures and play little battles. And Star Wars was perfect for the youth at that time because it was just so playful, and the toys reflected that. So, toys. And that was then. Had the world known that we should have saved all the boxes and everything, you can make a fortune on those vintage Star Wars toys today. So, after the success of Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back came out. I saw this particular film at Worcester's Lyric Twin Cinema. It came out on May 21st, 1980. I saw the original Star Wars at a theater down the street from that Lyric Twin Cinema. It was an old style theater, and my dad took my brother and I to a lot of movies there, even though I was really young. My dad wasn't afraid to take us to anything. We saw Alien, the original Alien, in that particular theater, and I was just a real little kid. And my dad has a funny story he always likes to tell, that when the Alien came out towards the end to go after Sigourney Weaver, I said really loud, "Daddy, is he gonna eat her?" And the whole theater heard this, and my dad always likes to tell that story, and embarrassing but yet funny and cute, I suppose. Moving forward, Empire Strikes Back comes out. My brother and I, we were all stoked for this, so we had a plan. We went to our neighbor's house to get a ride. His name was Todd Frank. So the three of us, in the rain, stood at the end of Todd's driveway, waiting for Todd's dad to come and pick us up. I remember I had a bunch of quarters saved up for this movie. We were all ready, right? Well, he was late. He was late, which was torture. But he finally did arrive. So we zipped downtown to the Lyric Twin Cinema. And I'll never forget this. Walking down the aisles of the theater, and I see Yoda on the screen. So we had missed the whole entire first segment of the Hoth battle. But looking back, it's okay, because that battle happened. We didn't really miss a ton. So, walking down the aisle, sitting down just thinking, man, I hope I didn't miss anything. I even sacrificed getting the normal, 25-cent bag of sweet tarts that I always had as a kid watching movies, to not miss anything in this new Star Wars film. So, we watched the movie, glued to the screen, and I'm fortunate to say this sentence. I had no idea, watching that movie, that indeed Luke Skywalker's father was Darth Vader. So, I got to sit in that chair, watching that screen, and having Darth Vader say, "Luke, I am your father." Wow, that was a big moment. Now, it's part of the whole saga. Everybody knows it. But then, it was a huge deal. It was like, whoa, this is getting deep. So, fell further in love with Star Wars, of course. And a couple years after that, Return of the Jedi came out. That was 1983, May 25th. I also saw that film at the Lyric Twin Cinema, which is basically where I saw all the awesome trilogies. I was so fortunate to be a kid in the 80s to go see all these classic films. Back to the Future, Indiana Jones, Goonies, Gremlins, you name it, I saw it at this theater. And in Return of the Jedi, I was a little bit older, still in grade school though. But I remember, even at that young age, sitting in that chair, watching Return of the Jedi, thinking, wow, this is unique. Some time had gone by. I was sentimental about the whole thing. I was like, I'm surviving a trilogy. And watching that film had some fun surprises, the whole Jabba bit, and the storyline, and it came to a close. Now, in the world we live in, everything is sequel drenched. You can just assume if a movie's a hit, it's going to have a sequel. And we didn't know. We thought this was it. Every George Lucas interview was, hey, this is done. This is it. This is the last. Return of the Jedi is the end of Star Wars. So we really held on to it and continued to buy the toys. We would go to garage sales, get junky toys, maybe trade with our friends. It was great. Star Wars was fun, and I was so thankful to experience the original trilogy in the movie theater. Now, the years after Return of the Jedi, there were a couple things that happened with Star Wars. There was an Ewok special that put out a couple TV specials, and there was a Droids cartoon. But after 1985, there wasn't much merchandise, especially once we start climbing into the early 1990s. We're talking nothing, folks. You couldn't go to a store and find anything. If you were lucky, you could go to maybe a drugstore that would carry old toys, and they might have a comic book or something left over, or some clearance figures. There was a store at the mall called KB Toy Store that would clearance a lot of Star Wars stuff. And Children's Palace and Toys R Us, which we didn't have any of those around here, so we were really limited. But once I got into high school, other interests took over, other movies. I was into my guitar, and skateboarding happened. I discovered that after seeing Back to the Future. And that's a whole story in itself. There was nothing Star Wars. You really couldn't get a fix. So Star Wars just kind of had a cult following at this time. It wasn't so mainstream like it is today. And graduating high school in 1992, by this time, all my Star Wars toys from my childhood were all put up in the crawl space, tucked away in a little basket like everybody did. So there wasn't a lot of Star Wars. However, for me, what kind of triggered a resurrection of being a fan was visiting I believe it was a Suncoast movie store. It might have been a Camelot store at the mall. And I'm at this mall, and I see in the corner they have a little display for Super Nintendo. And I was like, all right, I'll check it out. And whoa, there's a game out called Super Star Wars. I jump on this machine, I'll never forget it, their little demonstration thing, and I'm playing the game. And it tickled my brain and my heart, thinking, wow, you know what? I need to watch this movie again. Star Wars. I never forgot it, of course, but it just wasn't in the mainstream. It wasn't out there, and there were other things going on in my life, of course. So after that, I went out and I bought a Super Nintendo specifically for that game. And then I went up into the crawl space, and I took just a few of the toys out. I'd put them on a desk or something, and just had it around a little bit. And I rediscovered the films. I went out and bought them on VHS at this time because there was no DVDs or anything. And I paid $100 for the Camelot box set widescreen. Now, the word widescreen, letterbox, there's only one way to watch a movie, especially if you're a connoisseur of it and a fan of it. And for me, even back then when it wasn't popular, widescreen, people would go, oh, I'm watching this movie and the black lines at the bottom and the top are annoying. I don't want those. I don't like. For me, I got it. My dad explained when I was young ratios of movie screens. And Star Wars, of course, has that big widescreen as far as you can go in a theater. And I, of course, wanted to emulate that at home. So I bought the widescreen box set of the trilogy at Camelot Music for $100. Hey, it was worth it at the time. So I rediscovered those films. I fell in love watching them. And when I was younger, we never had the VHS tapes. I mean, those movies didn't come out to the public, really. You could rent them, but it was rare. This shows how creative I was. The first time I ever saw the original movies at home on TV was through, I believe, Showtime, the movie channel. And it was so long ago, we didn't even have a VCR yet. I'm old. Yeah, I'm dating myself. And what would I do? I used to take a tape recorder up to the screen, to the speaker rather, and I would tape record the sound of the movie. And then I'd go in my bedroom, press rewind, and play this, and thought, whoa, this is cool. I kind of have the movie. I can picture it in my head. That's how I wanted to have a copy of it for myself. Because when it was on Showtime, if you didn't have a VCR back then, you would have to look at the little booklet and space out exactly when you're going to see this movie. Boy, have times changed. Netflix, Hulu, and so on. And of course, Disney Plus now plays all the films, high definition, at the click of a button. But back then, it wasn't like that. So moving forward, 1992, I got that box set and watched the films and got into it. Got the toys back out. Now I graduated high school. And my dad basically kicked me out and said, you have to be out of the house by this date. Making a long story short, I did get out. I'm kind of glad looking back that he did that to me. And I got a storage shed, which I put all my belongings into, and I found a small home. And episode 1 podcast has this whole thing of my life story. We're not going to get into that right now. Graduating high school, and Star Wars, of course, did follow me. After I bought my first small home, I got a few little decoration type toy things out, and what happened? Laserdiscs happened. Now, some of you out there are going, what in God's name is a Laserdisc? I was ahead of the time. Laserdiscs were about the size of a record, and they looked like DVDs. This was before DVDs, so it was like a giant CD. It was silver and shiny. And my dad had a Laserdisc player, and the quality was just, at the time, amazing. We're talking, wow, you can pause it. Whoa, this is cool. You can click a button and go to the next chapter? What? You know, VCRs, VHS, you gotta fast forward and you can't pause anything. It's all jumpy. So I discovered Laserdiscs. During this time period, I bought a Laserdisc player, which wasn't cheap. I believe they were a couple $100, and all the movies were about $30. Now, why did I buy a Laserdisc player? Not only could you get widescreen movies and a really cool, clear digital format, but the Star Wars trilogy came out on Laserdisc. Like I was saying before with the Super Nintendo, I bought that system because of the games. They put out all the 3 movies on those games. I did the same thing with the Laserdiscs. I bought that player specifically for the Star Wars trilogy. Now, again, another investment. I spent $250 on the Laserdisc Definitive Star Wars Edition. I'll never forget standing in line at Camelot Music with this big heavy box. They only sold like 2 in the store, and I was one of the guys that bought them. Okay, but when you're a fan like that, for me, it was gold to have those movies in my home, widescreen, crystal clear. Oh, how times have changed. To think you can get the whole entire trilogy for maybe $30 to $40 on Blu-ray now. Not back then. So I'm watching the movies, I got them, and I wanted more of a fix. There wasn't a lot out there as far as Star Wars merchandise is concerned. Still at this time, you could find maybe posters, t-shirts, but there wasn't a lot. The first wave of any kind of a toy that came out, basically, that was mainstream, was through Micro Machines. If you remember those, they put out Star Wars Micro Machines. It was a big deal. and a company called Bendham's that made these posable little figures that weren't very impressive, but they were still Star Wars. Now, the Micro Machines were really hard to find when they first came out. I believe they came out in like packages of 3 ships. They were like vehicles. Wow, this is so nerdy and embarrassing, but I really wanted one of these. So I'll never forget. I was teaching guitar during those years and after high school for 10 years. And I called up a Toys R Us in, where was it? Rolling Acres in Akron, Ohio. And I called up that Toys R Us and I was like, do you guys have this in stock? And they said, we have 1 left. I'm thinking, all right. Well, I got off work at 8 and the Toys R Us closed at 9. So I got in my little Pontiac Sunbird in the blistering, crazy snow, drove 45 minutes to this Toys R Us. There it was. I bought it. Wow. Something that has Star Wars on it. And I bought it. And I risked my life for it. But at the time, I'm telling you, as a collector, because that's what happened during that time, I started to get into collecting vintage Star Wars. And there was a publication called Toy Shop. There was no eBay back then. There was no internet. You couldn't just jump on a website and be like, oh, I'm going to buy this. No, there was a fanzine, it was called. It was like a magazine. It was the Bible for Star Wars collectors. And I would buy things through there once in a while, vintage things. And it had a list of toy shows. So I used to go to toy shows a lot. I would travel far, at least, around the area. I'd go to Pennsylvania, Kentucky, stuff like that, in Ohio. And they would have these shows every weekend. And I would go to them, which was cool. And I'm glad I got into it at that time because there's items that I got back then that are worth so much more now. You see on eBay, my jaw hits the floor of how much things have increased in price with Star Wars toys. And that's what I did to kind of get my fix. I enjoyed it. It was fun. I was collecting some Star Wars stuff just to have my fix. I sound like a drug addict, but you know what? To a Star Wars fan, at that time especially, when there wasn't anything out there, if you're a fan of something, you like to have it around. It's a reminder, it's a comfort, it's fun to collect. Now mind you, I'm not a hoarder. I don't need help for this. I can hear my brother and my father saying, denial, you're in denial. They were quite taken back by my love of Star Wars. But to be a fan, it doesn't mean you have to have a lot of toys. It doesn't mean you have to know every detail, every character. You can be a fan solely on just enjoying the films. Because at the end of the day, folks, that's what these are. They're just movies. Yes, it gets to a point where it's almost religious. You love Star Wars. You're counting down the days to when the new film comes out or whatever. But at the end of the day, it is just a movie. And but it brings a lot of people, including myself, a lot of pleasure. But is it just a movie? That's like saying, oh, the Beatles, they're just a rock band. Really? Look at what they've done. Look at what has happened because of their success. You can say the same thing about Star Wars. Star Wars has opened up a lot of doors. Merchandising for movies, marketing of movies. It really was a landmark, a milestone film that changed modern day cinema. You can watch any documentary on Netflix about Star Wars and George Lucas in particular and his whole take on it and how the studios didn't want Star Wars originally. It was denied by a lot of companies, which is symbolic of our world, isn't it? Something that's different, and there's a lot of politics about that. But it was a success, so all of a sudden the floodgates open. It's making people money. Interesting to look at the timeline of all that. The word fan, of course, meaning fanatic. Anytime I tell people I'm a Star Wars fan, I always get the same reaction. Maybe they roll their eyes and just think, nerdy Star Wars guy. Like I own Star Wars bed sheets. that I have Star Wars curtains. I mean, I keep it in check. Not that I don't have my vices of Star Wars items, okay? But as far as being a fan, I consider myself what I kind of came up with. I'm a first generation Star Wars fan. Meaning, I was part of that group that was fortunate enough to see those original 3 films in the movie theater. It was a different time then. Speaking of the Beatles, probably talking like to somebody that experienced Beatlemania in 1964 compared to being a Beatles fan today. We're all the same. We share the same experiences and likes, but we experience it differently. And with Star Wars, I was part of the first generation before the prequels or the new 3 films. Speaking of prequels, wow, Star Wars started to get more popular and it just started to grow. And all of a sudden, you hear there's going to be a new Star Wars movie that George Lucas is doing. What? That was a bombshell in the Star Wars world among the fans, the original fans in particular. It just didn't seem real. And the prequels, when did those come out? That was 1999, May 19th, The Phantom Menace, which I bought tickets months before. I waited at Tinseltown Theater in Canton, Ohio for 7 hours for those tickets. Today, you can jump online, click a couple buttons, you're going to that movie. Back then, in the late 90s, you had to earn it, and it was like going to a rock concert. So I waited 7 hours for those tickets. And I saw that film when it first came out. A midnight showing. Now they're doing movies the day before, but then I even got a hotel. It was a big deal. It was like, wow, the Messiah. Star Wars, new movie, prequel. And going through that experience was cool. It was wild. I do have a bunch of memories from that. I remember going to Tinseltown and going towards my seat, and then I sit down, and the guy next to me tells his friend, he's like, you know, I read that Qui-Gon Jinn dies. So that mystery was shot for me. But whatever. That film was definitely packed with a lot. It was busy, busy, busy. A lot of CGI. Maybe too much, but at the time it was new technology, and George Lucas was like a kid in a candy store, and all his dreams came true on his vision. And a lot of people liked it, but a lot of people didn't like Jar Jar. Everybody hated Jar Jar. I didn't care. He was a character, and now it doesn't look so foreign to have a digital character in a movie, but at the time, his voice is probably what threw a lot of people off. I was just happy to have another Star Wars baby. That's how I looked at the prequels. To me, they were like stepchildren. I had the original trilogy, they're the blood kids, and now George Lucas is having some stepchildren. So, I'm going to love those stepchildren similar to the blood kids. Come on. And I didn't want to complain too much because we were lucky as fans to have new movies as it was. And it was feeding the empire, if you will, of Star Wars. I mean, there was more merchandise out, all this stuff happened, and it was back into mainstream society, which was cool. At the same time, I was kind of like, wow. In the early 90s, the late 80s, where was this interest from people? They weren't watching Star Wars. Now all of a sudden, everybody is a fan. And of course, the anticipated and expected sequel to The Phantom Menace came out, which was The Attack of the Clones, which was 2002, May 16th. 2002 was a big year for me in my personal life because that's when I turned pro and all that. That can be heard in episode 1 of my podcast. I talk all about that. Today is about Star Wars. So, The Attack of the Clones was a great movie. It introduced the new older Anakin Skywalker, which was Hayden Christensen. Natalie Portman was a little older. They took Jar Jar and diminished him quite a bit. And again, it was a CGI playground, probably a little bit too much for my taste, but it's a film, entertainment, had my popcorn, fed my Star Wars addiction, and I enjoyed that movie. Now, a couple years after that, Revenge of the Sith came out, and that was in 2005, May 19th. The prequels and the original trilogy all came out in May. It was a summertime movie. It's interesting that the new films all came out in December. I like the May dates because it was much warmer. And the original Star Wars came out in May. So, Revenge of the Sith, probably my favorite of the prequels. It was the darkest. Stuff happened in that movie. We saw Darth Vader. I mean, there was some action and the Obi-Wan relationship, and everything that happened in that movie was just big. So I liked that film. The Emperor had a huge role, and he came forward more to turn Anakin to Darth Vader. That was the climax. I mean, we already knew that going into the prequels. That was the satisfaction of seeing that last prequel, Revenge of the Sith, was to see how the Emperor took Anakin and transformed him into Darth Vader, which is who we knew in the original trilogy. So that movie was great. Came to a close, and we figured, wow, 6 Star Wars films are now out there. Wonderful. Who would have thought George Lucas had 3 new stepkids, a total of 6 children. A couple years go by. Next thing we know, it's 2015. This is definitely something I never thought would happen. Talk to any first generation old school Star Wars fan and they will tell you, we never thought there would be an actual sequel to The Return of the Jedi. It just seemed inconceivable. Any interviews you saw with actors, they would say, oh yeah, it's never going to happen, it's done, and all these interviews with Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, and George Lucas in particular. The chapters were closed, it was done. Well, guess what, folks? You never know in life, and there's a new movie, Force Awakens. It was coming, 2015, December 18th. Is when that movie was released, which was fun in some ways. It might have been cold out, but it was close to Christmas, so rock and roll. Everybody's in a good mood. It's going to do well at the theater. The Force Awakens was an interesting film. The first showing, there was so much information that I was kind of overwhelmed. And I had to see that a couple more times in the theater to digest it all. Of course, I would see it a few times anyhow. It was a given. And new characters were introduced. Rey, Finn, Poe, BB-8. I mean, that was a good film. Yes, it echoed Episode 4, A New Hope, Star Wars quite a lot. But so what? Here we are. Let's not take it for granted that we have a new Star Wars film. A sequel! And it took a bit, but it was all about getting to Luke, which they did in the very end, which was satisfying. And I was like, whoa, they made him look old. But he's now, in this phase of the saga, at Obi-Wan phase. So he was an old guy. He got the lightsaber. Movie came to a close. And then, of course, what's the year here? 2017, December 15th, is when The Last Jedi came out. And here we are again, folks. Another movie. Thinking about this film. This one was busy. Adam Driver had a bigger role. And there was a lot going on in that film. And it had some moments that were kind of confusing. Rian Johnson was the new director guy that took over from J.J. Abrams. And during this time, Carrie Fisher had passed away. So in the end credits, there is a dedication to her, which was well-deserved. And her role, of course, was bigger and a unique film because we got to see Luke and Leia, Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher interact face-to-face. That's like seeing John Lennon and Paul McCartney have a conversation today. It was pretty heavy to witness that. And the storyline progressed, which brought us to the final installment of the whole entire saga, which is The Rise of Skywalker, which came out last year, 2019, December 20th. And wow, the final film. So they say. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that this is it for that particular saga. Will they spin off like crazy, like they did with Solo and Rogue One and Mandalorian? Yes, this is going to go on forever. I'm pretty certain of that. Star Wars is this crazy thing that has taken off, which is fine. Who cares? Because it can feed an addiction for a fan. Having the movies out there, and it's about fun. Some people take these movies, like the storylines in particular, just crazy serious. They get angry that a plot went this way, or like they would have done this and that, and that's okay. But I can't imagine getting angry about it, because we're fortunate to have these movies at all, the sequels and the prequels. So let's, not complain too much. It is just a film, in a sense, and I trusted the people that got involved with it, Kathleen Kennedy and all that, J.J. Abrams. He took it back in the last movie, and they did what they did. Did I like the film? Yes. First viewing, it was a little like, what? Rey is a Palpatine? What? It is nice once in a while to go to movies and to be surprised. And that was actually a surprise, which was cool. I had figured that Rey would have been the daughter of Luke. That was kind of where it was going. I mean, it made sense. Maybe Kylo Ren or Ben Solo and Rey were maybe brother, sister, that kind of combo, like they did with Luke and Leia in Return of the Jedi. But no, she's a Palpatine. So it all came to a close, and I've seen the movie, the newest Rise of Skywalker movie, 3 times, and it's better each time. Indeed. First viewing, I was just like, what? System overload. But by the second and third viewing, it settled in a lot better, and I like it. It's a movie. It was fun. I was entertained. I didn't fall asleep. And it closed the chapter of the whole saga. The only criticism I have at the end, I was really expecting a bigger bam at the end. If this is the final of all 9 films, I wanted to see all the ghost figures of people like Luke and Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan, all the Jedi Masters, Yoda in their ghost form doing a happy dance. Instead, we got on a hill in Endor 2 Ewoks jumping up and down, and a couple shots of Cloud City. But who cares? Who cares? It was awesome. The movie ended. I survived 9 films. And I've heard other old school fans talk about this. The idea that you want to survive the movies. It's like the prequels. I was thinking, oh man, I hope I live long enough to see episode 2. And now with this new trilogy as well. Same thing. Like, wow, am I going to make it to live to this? That's a person that's a fan, indeed, when you think about something like that, to survive all 9 films and to experience them. And I've enjoyed it thoroughly. And now, of course, with Disney Plus and Netflix or whatever, there's all these resources to watch the films. I have them on Blu-ray. I bought a Blu-ray player specifically because of the Blu-ray Star Wars movies when they came out. You see a pattern here? All my technology was bought because of Star Wars. It's been an investment, but I have kept it in check. We can talk about collectibles too. Toys. There's so many toys out there now. I really don't think the toys are as cool as they used to be. I'm partial to the vintage Star Wars toy line. Absolutely. For sentimental reasons. And the fact that when those toys came out, from 1977 to 1983, 1985 with the Power of the Force toy edition, people bought those toys for the most part for one reason. Because they were kids and they wanted to play with the toys. Now, you have a generation of people that are going to Walmart or whatever, and they're buying these toys. They're not playing with them, so they're staying in the package, and they throw them in a showcase. And now if everybody does that, that toy's not particularly rare. This happened in the late 90s with Kenner came back and made some Star Wars figures with the orange and green cards, if you remember those. And everybody bought those thinking we're going to put our kids through college with these figures. Well, those figures can now, most of them, be bought for $2 to $5 at any flea market, collector's show, or whatever. They didn't really amount to much. I bought those during that time, a few of them. I didn't go overboard because I liked them. That's why I bought it. I didn't buy it to like, I'm going to turn around and sell these. And that's kind of what happened, where the original trilogy, the old stuff, those boxes are rarer than the actual toy. And they're worth more for the most part. It's getting anything vintage in the box in mint condition is gold. And that's kind of fun. That makes it more fun to collect. So I'm partial to those items as a Star Wars collector. I have had the unique experience to meet one of the original Star Wars actors in 1994, I believe it was, in Cincinnati, Ohio. There was a toy show convention going on in Cincinnati, and there was also a music convention going on in the same building that my father was attending. Complete coincidence. And so we drove down there, got a hotel, and he went to the music convention, and I went to the Star Wars convention. And Dave Prowse, who played Darth Vader in the first 3 original films, was there to do autographs, which was super, super cool. And I was fortunate to meet him. I had him sign a few items, a 8x10 photo of Darth Vader and an Empire Strikes Back poster. It says, "To Doug, David Prowse is Darth Vader." He has an interesting history in itself with George Lucas. They didn't have a great relationship. If you're not aware of this, he's been banned from all the official Star Wars celebrations with the whole Disney thing. There's a documentary out that you can find about him. What is that called? I Am Your Father. That's what it's called. I believe it might be on Netflix. You can find it somewhere. Great documentary. He's an interesting person, an actor that has a huge history of playing villains back in the day, even black and white movies, and he did a lot. He did a lot of philanthropy work, which was cool. And look into Dave Prowse. He was really nice. It was cool to hear him speak. What was interesting is that now everybody knows who everybody is with the internet and faces, but in the line, there's a really long line to get into this convention. And when he walked in, he had a suitcase, and he walked right by me. He walked by everybody, and nobody recognized him. But I was like, there he is, David Prowse. I was stoked. And I got to hear him speak and got the autograph. So that's neat. Now, actors, I mean, they're not really like musicians. They don't tour in the same way you can see a band. If you're a fan of somebody, you can go and wait to their tour dates and look and you see them in person. But actors, it's a lot different. The other actor that I got to see in person but not meet was Anthony Daniels, C-3PO. They were touring, I believe it was called A Musical Journey. This was maybe 2006 or 7, around that time period. And it was the London Symphony Orchestra was touring, and he was the master of ceremonies. How cool was that? He came out in a gold suit with R2-D2 and did all the commentary. They had videos playing, and that was cool. Live Star Wars music with him. And I think those are the only 2 people that I've come across, and getting to meet Darth Vader was definitely cool. I do have a couple Star Wars life events memories that come to mind. One in particular is Halloween. I believe it was 1993. And every year for Halloween, my family did a big shindig of something. We always had a different theme. The Brown house was the house to go to at Halloween time for trick or treat. I was the George Lucas, if you will, of each project. I was the one who masterminded everything and did all the sounds and the sets and the cast. One year we did, Nightmare Before Christmas, Ghostbusters, the Muppets, oddly enough. But I'll never forget the year we did Star Wars. It was awesome. I had life-size Darth Vader. We had stormtroopers on the ground. You would ring the doorbell and the door would open and there stood Darth Vader and there was a recording of him. I edited the some vocals from the movies and it would sound like Darth Vader was talking to the people. And that was fun. I really enjoyed that. Had the music blasting. And I got some foam and some foam board and I painted and drew R2 and 3PO and lots of fun creative times with that. And just recently, December of 2019, at the local roller rink, I got to combine my two favorite things, which are skateboarding and Star Wars. It was Star Wars skate, and the management of this roller rink was all about it. So to put those two together were super cool. I had some friends that came out with me and we did a skateboard demonstration on the roller rink floor. It's not something you get to do every day. We brought ramps out and entertained the folks, and I was the DJ. I did the Star Wars music anyhow, that portion of it. I took about 12 songs and added sound effects, and Star Wars has been good for my creative juices, and I have a lot of them, and I got to do that. So that was a really special, cool day to put out Star Wars and skateboarding. Star Wars is a lot like skateboarding, or my skateboard life and history. I've been skating for well over 30 years, and Star Wars has followed me since I was 5 years old. So to be a fan and to go through all those movies and to have it part of my life has been special. There's no question about it. And those films have done that for so many people. And that's what makes it special. That's what makes it unique. Because it's a movie to some people, yes. But to other people, it's a lot more. And now it's so big. People were kind of jolted, especially diehard fans, about Disney jumping on board with the future of Star Wars. George Lucas, for a gazillion billion dollars, sold Star Wars and all that to Disney. And I can see why he chose Disney, because Disney has a lot of power and a lot of people, and it really puts Star Wars out there for everybody. Star Wars is for everybody, and that's what makes it special. Because Star Wars isn't just for kids. It's not just a kids movie. It's for all ages and families. It brings people together. It creates a community. And that to me is unique and special. I mean, these movies inspire so many people, and the creative elements. And most of all, these films have a lot of heart, and it's something that we need in cinema and in life. And for me personally, I have such a love relationship with it. It's very similar to my relationship with skateboarding. To me, skateboarding isn't just a piece of wood with 4 wheels on it. It represents so much more. And something like Star Wars is very similar. So I can marry the two of those. With Star Wars heart, it's timeless, which is great. And again, it is for all ages. I'm not that far removed from that little boy when I was 5 years old watching Star Wars in the movie theater. I have grown, I have evolved, I've got some wisdom, some experiences, and I see Star Wars differently than I did when I was that age. But it has gone with me through my life. So with sentimental thoughts, I leave it at that. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you have some similar stories and thoughts. I hope Star Wars has reached you as much as it has reached me. It will continue. Everybody's in love with Baby Yoda and the Mandalorian show, which I've watched, of course, all 8 episodes. And that's fun that Star Wars has lived on because it continues to inspire and reach others. And anybody who knows me, my life is all about that. My skateboarding career, where I've ended up, it's all about making a difference, inspiring others, and staying positive. That's what we all need to do. So thanks again for listening to episode 2 here. If you haven't had a chance, check out episode 1. Talk about my life, skateboarding, my family. I go pretty in depth. I enjoyed doing that. It was a bit therapeutic. For more information on my comings and goings, you can visit my official website, which is www.dougbrown.org. And I've got a couple other guests coming up soon. I have got a rapper, I've got a paranormal investigator, and a bunch of other people. So stay tuned. We've got more episodes ahead. And most of all, may the Force be with you. Till next time.
Doug Brown. Method.